So what is ludonarrative? Allow me to explain before we dive headfirst into this rabbit hole. Ludo is Latin for I play, and narrative means, well, to put it simply, narrative means story. Thus you get play story. Ludonarrative has been a thing in games for arguably the entire existence of the medium. Basically what it means in a more abstract sense is effectively the meshing of narrative and gameplay, and it was a topic of much debate after Click Hawking's paper, which shall be discussed shortly. Many people thought that narrative and gameplay were entirely exclusionary, and the more of one you had, the less you had of the other, which I partially blame on a certain French game designer we'll be talking about later in this video, where others believed the story of a game, the gameplay aspect, could be interweaved to perfection. Ludonarrative dissonance was coined by a creative director working for LucasArts in 2007 named Clint Hawking, in a critique he did of BioShock on his website clicknothing.typepad.com, link in the description. He used the term ludonarrative dissonance to describe BioShock as being contradicting in its gameplay and its story, because the story is about the relation between freedom and power, and that it says, rather explicitly, that rational self-interest is moral or good is a trap, and that the power we derive from complete and unchecked freedom necessarily corrupts and ultimately destroys us. He puts forward that the gameplay enforces rational self-interest, where the story enforces the idea that the power we derive from unchecked freedom and the belief in the goodness of rational self-interest can destroy us. Therefore, the narrative experience is different from the interactive or ludic experience, thus creating ludonarrative dissonance. Keep that in mind because it will be important. In my opinion, a game with good ludonarrative is a game that simply does not fall victim to the curse of ludonarrative dissonance and allows the player to forge their own kind of individual experience from the game. That's the beauty of gaming, the fact that no two playthroughs of the same game look remotely similar. Let's run down 3 great examples of ludonarrative in gaming history: Darkest Dungeon, the Halo franchise, and XCOM. Darkest Dungeon is a 2D, side-scrolling, turn-based, roguelike dungeon crawler where everyone has their own story to tell. It's all about sending adventuring parties into your manor in order to purge the evil from it. Inevitably, these adventurers will die or suffer some other gory fate, and all you can hope is that the gear they acquired before their untimely demise helps you on your next go-around. This is an example of a ludonarrative that more focuses on a ludic experience than a narrative one, with the game having little to no story and leaving it up to the players to forge their own stories using the adventures they hired and their experiences inside the manor. The game facilitates individualized storytelling by making your players care about the adventurers. And if you want to know more about this, watch Hbomberguy's video on the ludonarrative experience of Darkest Dungeon, as he goes into more depth than this video naturally allows me to. So instead, pause this video and watch that, and after that's done, let's talk about Halo. Yeah, right. Time to talk Halo. Specifically, Bungie Halo, because I feel like the newer Halos go against this kind of motif. Halo is an example of a game that focuses more on the narrative part of ludonarrative. The trilogy is all about humanity on its last legs, as it is outgunned, outmanned, and overall outmatched, with little to no chance of survival in the face of such a superior foe. With the undying will of humanity and insane levels of ingenuity, we pull through and keep moving forward, always able to scrape a victory just out of certain defeat. And that is exactly what you do throughout the entirety of the Bungie quadrology. That's right. Think about it. The game's core gameplay is all about being clever about weapons choices while scavenging for gear on the battlefield as ammo runs out or certain enemies that are weak to certain guns start appearing. Almost every level of Halo starts you with just the assault rifle and magnum, but I guarantee you by the end of the mission, you're probably using some weird combination of UNSC and Covenant gear, because the game is entirely about a scrappy humanity that refuses to die and will do anything it needs to in order to survive. That is what is going on in the story, and the gameplay is used to reinforce that to great effect, thus creating a ludonarrative experience worth praising as one of the best efforts in the entire industry. Moving on, we have XCOM, a game all about the relationships and personal stories you forge with your Marines as you give them the necessary orders to most efficiently kick alien ass. If you've played XCOM, you've had that one Marine you've gotten really attached to, and more than likely, he was killed, and I can guarantee you can vividly recount every excruciating detail of rushing him to the evac spot while bleeding out, or every emotion you felt as he got sniped from the distance. This kind of gameplay is what makes a ludonarrative experience truly special for me. The ability to form a unique connection that you, and only you, will be able to experience. Ludonarrative experiences are something genuinely only seen in video games, where players can truly have their own experience with the game, and I think when it's done right, it's one of the best ways to make your own pre-established story campaign engaging, because you're going out of your way to make the players seem like more than just a passive observer. However, if attempted and done wrong, well... Now, remember near the beginning of the video I mentioned a certain French game dev that I believe created the misconception that having more gameplay means you have less story and vice versa? Well, we're going to talk about it now, and if for some reason you actually enjoy his games, you're probably going to want to leave now, because for the next 5 to 10 minutes, we're going to be talking about David Cage. More specifically, how much I dislike David Cage. Now, David Cage is everything I hate in modern video game storytelling and how it treats the player like a total child. He makes games that toy with the idea of ludonarrative experience, but gets it completely wrong. You see, at least in my eyes, a ludonarrative experience is like being on a boat in open ocean. You can go any direction you want, and your experience is largely defined by your own agency. But playing a David Cage game, or a Mass Effect game, or really most games that pride themselves on having impactful player choice, tends to be more like a railroad, where you get to decide which track the railroad switches to every couple of hours. I know many people view these games as being player-driven, with actions that have consequences, a term that will come up a lot in these games, when in reality, it's just a disguise. The game is still directing you on a very set path. It's just a set path with a fork in the road occasionally. That sounds like player agency done right? Well, this is a fork in the road with a chain link electric fence surrounding the two paths, making it so that you have to pick one and stick with it. These experiences are effectively choose your own adventure books with an emphasis on the narrative part of ludonarrative, to the point where there is next to no actual ludic value to the game. It makes the player feel like a passive observer because they aren't allowed to have actual agency. They're forced to go down the 2 to 3 specific paths the devs have allowed them to go down. This is also present in Mass Effect, specifically Mass Effect 3, the modern Deus Ex games, and really any plot-driven open-world RPG you can think of. Having a game tout itself as a ludonarrative experience such as Heavy Rain or Until Dawn, while failing in every regard to actually be one, makes me sad. Because ludonarrative experiences have the potential to make the most engaging and memorable pieces of narrative fiction of all time. In simple terms, games such as these do not actually facilitate a ludonarrative experience, but rather a narrative experience, where the player is forced to sit down and occasionally pick A, B, or C, making it barely more interactive than a movie. I think it's time we wrap this video up. I've said all I need to say, and honestly, it's getting a bit long. So let's end it with some closing statements. In short, ludonarrative experiences are a hotly debated topic among the gaming community. Many people say that narrative detracts from the gameplay, and some say that the two can coexist perfectly, and anywhere in between. Well, where do I fall? Well, I think a game having a ludonarrative aspect to it, or even being a fully fledged ludonarrative experience, can elevate a game from fantastic to masterpiece levels of amazing. In the end, I fully and truly believe in the beauty of the player-made story. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. I'll be back shortly with a Halo-themed video. We'll see you Starside.